Aurel! How are you, my friend? Oh,
Can you hear me? I'm using the
I hear you
AirPods.
perfectly. And I am only now realizing, although I should before, what a wonderful timbre your voice has.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Have used it a lot in recent days. I think I'm spending something like 10 hours a day on Zoom, on conference calls, FaceTime, and other technology.
It's funny, I think we're busier now in isolation than I was in my normal world, you know? Yesterday I had to write a 4,000 word article on Baselworld, and then I had like 3 Zoom interviews, but it's nice, you know, and it's wonderful to connect with people such as yourself, Aurel.
Thank you. I mean, the one nice thing is we see each other much more often thanks to Zoom and Teams and whatever Microsoft invented. We see each other. Normally we would text each other, email each other. These days we're having a tete-a-tete.
Absolutely. Well, you know, I'm so pleased you could join us. We're about to launch also a series of interviews with all the different CEOs of the watch brands that will be launching their novelties on the 25th as well, which is very exciting for us. But I wanted to get started with some of the people who've made some of the most instrumental changes in the watch industry. So I think you may have seen the one I did on Jean-Claude Biver last week. I wanted to interview you, Aurel, because I think you are the man that has shaped the culture that we're living in, the horological culture we're living in one of the most profound ways. And of course, that has to do with our love affair with vintage watches and our understanding and recognition and appreciating of them through your eyes, you know. But before we get to that, I wanted to talk briefly about the subject that's on everyone's minds, which is Baselworld. And 2 days ago at 2 p.m. Swiss time on April 14th, which I believe will be a date that the MCH group may never forget. You know, the union of Rolex, Patek, Philippe, Chopard, and Chanel explained that they will be leaving Baselworld and will be creating their new salon in association with the Foundation de l'Horlogerie, which I know you're part of as well, in Geneva. Adjacent to or around the same time as Geneva Watch and Wonders, which is great from the perspective of an alignment. And initially, of course, everyone perceives of me as being kind of an outspoken critic of Baselworld. But, you know, to be fair, I actually love Basel Fair. I love Baselworld, or I love the memories that I have of Baselworld and Basel Fair. And of course, my history doesn't go as far back as Rolex's does, which goes back to 1939, or Chopard's goes back to 1964. But it was a wonderful unity of people with the like-minded passion for horology. And I think it's really sad, actually, that this had to happen, you know? And I think that I had a conversation with Jean-Claude Biver last week, and he said, listen, the problem with the third millennium is that the third millennium is being run with the same rules as the 20th century, and they don't apply anymore. And one of the biggest rules in the 20th century was chase profit, no matter what the cost to human beings, no matter what the cost to the planet, which is, you know, in a time like this is particularly poignant for us. And you see, as a result of MCH Group's refusal to refund the money that was being paid by brands. Now, of course, Patek and Rolex is not a big issue for them, but for a lot of the smaller brands, it's a huge issue for them because they are really hurting this year. And they could use that money to shore up all of the bleeding that they're experiencing. And in some ways, it was, you know, at least in my mind, quite unethical for MCH Group to say, no, we're not going to refund you the money. Or I'll tell you what, we're going to divert 85% of it to next year for your fee for next year, and then keep 15% of it for the operational fee costs of this year. It was just really, it was very shameful to me. I don't know. Tell me what your perspective on it was, Aurel.
Well, similar to you, I have very fond memories going back to the 1980s when, as a teenager, I would take the train at 6 a.m. from Zurich to Basel with my father, trying to get as many catalogs, brochures, a few lapel pins and other souvenirs back to Zurich, and then treasure them. Yes, you're right, and especially Jean-Claude is right. The classic concept of a big show should have been reviewed many, many years ago. And I'm sure we're going to talk about auctions as well, because in auctions, we haven't actually evolved at all since probably the Romans were auctioning off slaves. So shame on us, shame on me. Having said this, I think one of the biggest problems was not Basel or SIHH Watches and Wonders. I think the biggest problem was that for the press, for the trade, for the watch lovers, it was just not practical to travel twice from across the globe at huge expenses. And I know some retailers or some distributors who said every time sending 20, 30 people from my group goes into the hundreds and hundreds of thousands twice a year. Then add a slightly, a gentle abuse of hotel shortage, restaurant tables, taxis, bed and breakfast, and other type of services. And I understand that the market said, sorry, two are too many, two are one too many. In my dream, naive dream, because I have friends in both organizations, I'm very close to many, and I love both cities. I live in Geneva, but there's nothing wrong as such for Basel. Also, the art world, Basel is a fantastic mecca for art lovers. In my naive dream, they would have literally sort of met in the middle and organized a merger. Now, you can't merge a private foundation and a company that is on the stock market with the canton being a majority shareholder. But literally, back at the GPHG in 2019, I was chatting right before the start with the CEO of an important brand, and he said, one day, maybe one day, somebody will manage to get the two together, and that person should receive a huge sort of 30 feet statue in the center of Geneva or whatever city, whoever manages to bring them together. Never did I dream finishing my Easter chocolate and wake up on Tuesday, the 14th of April, and see those breaking news. I'm also thinking of not just the winners, I'm thinking of the losers. There will be losers. Some watch companies that were in Basel will maybe not find a space in Palexpo. I'm thinking of, anyone who had a piece of the cake in Basel. That means hotels. And it's not the hotel director who's going to get a salary cut. It's maybe the gouvernante who prepared the bedroom. It's the waiter who got a tip. They will be missing the tens and tens of thousands of visitors that were coming to Basel since 1939. So one eye smiles, the other one has a tear. I always think of, and I think it was a Rolex ad 10 or so years ago that struck me, where you see, in Wimbledon center court, there's sort of like a tunnel where the players, the finalists, have to walk through, and only them when going to the center court to play the final. And I don't know if it's left or right or above this sort of tunnel, there's a plaque inscribed, I think it's marble, roughly, free translation, you should never pass this passage if you're not prepared to face victory with the same degree of humbleness as you face defeat with pride.
Bravo.
So I'm not saying that the Watches and Wonders in Basel were playing a Wimbledon final against each other, but I think it was inevitable that one of them won't be there one day.
Yes.
And both were fighting hard, both were trying hard. It's not just the victory, and that is maybe also important, it's not just the victory of one person at the helm of one company and the defeat of the other person at the helm of the other company. They both inherited years and tens of years, decades, of what their predecessor did, good or bad. I know that Perrin and Coligny decades ago had a vision. Mm-hmm. So they should also be credited. At the same time, the Basel management that was only put in place 2 years ago, how much can they save things that have gone wrong the last decade? Possibly. Yes. So it's a very difficult moment. The landscape will change, and it just shows how Corona triggers developments, accelerates processes that were due for many years, if not decades, and many of us have been maybe sleeping too long.
Absolutely. You know, Aurel, I love the fact that you brought up Wimbledon as well, because one of the stories that emerged from this year was that Wimbledon, of course, canceled, you know, the 2020 version of it. And Wimbledon every year had been taking pandemic insurance. So that meant when this happened, Wimbledon suddenly got a cash windfall of something in the hundreds of millions of pounds. And that would be the question that I would have. Yeah, it's just a story that everyone was talking about in London. What question I would have to MCH Group is, if you have the most powerful and sort of most populated like watch fair that is attended every year, do you not also have some sort of disaster insurance? I mean, you must, right? And if you do, and you're capable of activating it, because there has never been a moment where it's more justified for you to activate it, then surely you must be getting a payout of some kind. And the best thing that you could possibly do now to save your dignity and actually help people would be to help all of those smaller brands, all of those smaller, maybe medium-sized brands, to get their money reimbursed to them or refunded to them so that they can actually do something for this year, you know? And I agree with you. It's kind of like, what's going to happen to those guys who, you know, guys who have started up a watch brand or who are independent or whose cash flow is very tight? What's going to happen to those guys? And you're right as well. I'm not necessarily sure if they will also be invited to exhibit in Pal Expo. I mean, it'd be really nice if they were, if there was a separate hall for them, if they didn't want to sort of muddle the water, as the case may be, because if they don't anyway, they will have to come to Geneva because that's the only venue that exists anymore. Now, I know you were going to exhibit at Basel this year. Am I correct?
So we have planned to exhibit not just in Basel, but also at Watches and Wonders. So it shows how and this is not sort of the Swiss diplomacy, saying I'm friends with everyone, but we believe that us in terms of vintage and collector's watches are only at the beginning of a huge journey, that the community that we have and the community that Phillips has amounts to a couple of, I mean, just over 10,000 collectors. Is it a lot? Well, it is a lot when I think back in the 90s when our community was a few hundred. At the same time, I know the community of watch lovers is much, much bigger than what we, and we is not just Phillips, but also the entire auction industry and the dealers, the collectors can possibly imagine. So it is a natural for us to grow and communicate like missionaries our religion and preach to retailers, to the press, a part of the market that some may not yet know and may still be scared about.
Wonderful. I mean, I love the fact that you're growing this culture. And I also like the idea that the primary new watch businesses are recognizing that this culture actually empowers them and really helps to tell their stories in a very beautiful way and creates this bridge of continuity between the past and the future. Now, Aurel, what's going on with the prices of vintage watches? Because they seem to be going up rather, you know, it's incredible. There was a 6241 Paul Newman that was, I think, sold at auction. And I think this was like one of those digital auctions or purely digital auctions, which I think a couple of weeks ago. And it went for, and it was a bone stock 6241, not a double signature watch or anything like that. It went for like close to 300,000 US dollars. I mean, is it the fact, you know, and I guess in times of crisis, people always retreat to what they consider to be blue chip assets. Has it gotten to the point where vintage watches are the new blue chip assets?
I would be delighted if I knew all the answers. Short term, midterm, long term. There have been transactions that you just correctly reported. I think it is premature to conclude, because one Paul Newman made $300,000+, that the Paul Newman market is now $300,000. Just another day at a smaller auction house, another one that seems to be even nicer made $200,000. I don't even know if it's Hammer or Hammer plus premium. It only takes two to establish a price. Now I'm interested in two people, but I'm not able to give you a full market report because of one result that is, you know, made by two people. The one and most important thing I observe is that the amount of transactions have probably dropped by 90% around the world. I really think we've seen a huge drop in numbers of transactions. If we had more transactions, we could probably conclude where the market is heading. Am I that depressed that the market has dropped 90%? Well, from an economic, the market volume, the transactions, not the value. Well, obviously, as an auction house, I'm sorry that we cannot transact. Having said that, the fact that there are so few transactions means there are very few sellers, either because they don't want to sell or they can't even sell because you can't, in some countries, even go to the bank to pick up your watch.
Sure.
So the market is currently frozen. A frozen market is better than a market in the free fall. I mean, we remember a couple of weeks ago how the Dow Jones day by day, 3, 5, 7, 10, 12%. I couldn't even look at the numbers anymore. But that's because they continued trading no matter how dramatic the circumstances. Speaking to probably about 50 collectors every week, one thing I realize, they say altogether, if I can net get the number for my watch that I have in mind, and they have in mind a number that is probably more like November, December 2019, I'm not a seller.
Right.
I'm not a seller. The buyers who call me and say, hey, Aurel, is there a deal out there for me? I tell them there is no deal, because first of all, I can't even bring a watch to you. I can't even show a watch to you. I can show you pictures, but are you really going to buy a, $6-digit vintage watch that you've never seen personally before without inspection? Some say, yeah, I'm paying 65 cents a dollar. I'm like, yeah, keep on dreaming, because the seller still wants 100 cents a dollar.
Right.
So who's going to give up first? Are the buyers accepting that the vintage market is still at 100 cents a dollar? Or will there one day be a seller who has to sell, and he will just try at 95, 90, 85, 80 until somebody says, yes, I'll buy it? My feeling is that we're in a fortunate position that the beautiful 1518s, the great vintage Stellines, the great quality vintage watches, but it could also be a great Speedmaster, a great IWC Pilot's watch, are just not becoming available, if not for the same amounts of dollar than what the sellers had in mind. Going back to 9/11, going back to Lehman and Bernie Madoff, all I've seen is that the sellers were not convinced to consign, resulting in a shortage on the market. I remember our May 09 auction was such a thin catalog, but with great watches. And whatever great watches we had, they made super strong prices because simply the market was so much shorter. I keep on thinking to myself, the amounts of money that the Feds in Europe, in America, in Asia are throwing into the market, I don't even know how many zeros that number has. I couldn't tell you, seriously. And I don't think I'm that stupid. So it just means it's such a long number. It's a multiple of what the Feds have printed in after 2008. I believe that whether it's Ferraris, contemporary art, and great watches, post 2008, we've seen a steady, beautiful growth in value. Have they grown in value, or has money just become less valuable? And the numbers that I read that are currently being thrown into the system for a good reason, otherwise we would all be literally bankrupt and the system would implode. I think that money eventually will end up in the pockets of the consumers, man who sells croissants next door, the man who has a little fashion boutique around the corner, maybe your pockets or my pockets. And what are we going to do with it? We're either going to go on holidays, buy a new cashmere jacket, buy a nicer home, buy a nicer watch. And these trillions of dollars have to go somewhere. So maybe short term, we have a frozen market and it's tough for those who have to collect cash flow to keep alive. But the minute that mankind has found a way to defeat Corona, whether it's by wearing masks, keep on social distancing, or have some flu shot, the markets will be very strong in my view.
I totally agree with you, Aurel. And I think that you were the one who basically taught us all how to collect watches. And you always, and I'm going to show you some watches later because I want to get your thoughts of it in the context of where we are now. But But it was very simple. It was buy the best version, the most original version of whatever you can afford, right? And I totally agree with that. And I think that when it comes to these very precious watches that have an extraordinary originality, let's face it, there's not a whole bunch of them. You know, it's not a massive market. You know, and it's the same thing for anything that's really something wonderful, whether that's an incredible townhouse in the West Village in New York, or whether it's a 250 GTO or what have you. No one's going to give you a deal on that, right? And invariably, the thing is, people who have these as assets, well, first of all, it's very hard to get a loan to go buy a vintage watch, you know. So usually it's from people that have liquidity and have, you know, fairly deep capital reserves, and they've purchased that with the idea of, because there's an emotional attachment to it as well, right? It's something that they genuinely love. So to get someone to part with something that they love, which they also know is exceptional, and most likely even if they were able to sell it, they would never be able to find another one of those. It's quite tough, right? You're not, so I feel as if for these really, really sort of premium assets, really great condition watches, I wouldn't even go into like the 1518s and the 2499s, which are, you know, those things are made in such tiny quantities, but even just really good, like a really good Paul Newman Daytona, you know, it's not easy to find one, you know? And so I totally agree with you. I think that these assets are protected by virtue of their rarity. But they're also, you were the person that taught us to understand how to appreciate that rarity.
Well, thank you for your kind words. I hope you cut that piece out of our conversation. It's a little bit embarrassing. But first, just to give you, I don't think I'm a marketing genius. I don't think that I invented anything. What I've learned is to bring together what I believe, what I say, and what I do. And it is natural to desire the most original example. It is natural to desire the most beautiful example. It's natural to aspire to the one with a great provenance, to the one that was a barn find, to the one. So I've started loving vintage watches some 35 years ago. And it's a journey. I had to learn, I had to make mistakes, but today I know what I love. And I say it, and I say it out loud. Now, if others concluded independently with the same sort of path or journey that this is the right thing to do, well, great. Maybe I'm the one who speaks out publicly because I can print my opinion in a catalog or say it on an interview. They can't because they're discreet collectors. So that's one thing. The most wonderful conversations I've had was just 2 days ago with a super collector in Asia, dear friend of mine, and somehow we started talking watches. And normally we speak about the family and many other parts of philosophical discussions, etc. And the most intelligent thing I've heard in the last few weeks coming from a collector was him saying, well, if somebody offered me the watch I always wanted, and let's say it's a $2 million watch, I would run to the bank and wire $2 million. Right. And I said, you wouldn't want to negotiate and, you know, say, hey, there must be a Corona discount. He said, why would I? First of all, he said, if I'm lucky that a watch that I always wanted is now coming out because maybe somebody's just raising a bit of cash flow, I should not try and make a steal. I should just be happy to get it. Another interesting point he said, as a collector, I never think, is it today a good moment to buy or a good, or not such a good moment to buy. When I started 20 years ago, I embarked on a journey that I was hoping it would last 30, 40, 50 years. And hence it is normal that the market will do that. And like Warren Buffett said, you will never get when you sell at the highest and when you buy at the lowest. You just go with the market and it will average out. So he said, I'm in the market, call me if you've got my dream watch for $2 million. So I think we have a particular privilege to be in a market where such fine, and I say fine, not that the guy who buys a watch at the what do you call it, the tax-free, duty-free shop at the airport, that is of course of a different quality. Maybe it has a battery, maybe it's not gold, but gold-plated. But we're lucky that the watches we're transacting with are attracting a particularly fortunate and educated group of people. And overall, I don't think the vintage watch market is suffering. I think we will maybe see a bump, maybe not even, and go all the way with continued growth, because everybody's looking for something meaningful. And
Yes.
sadly, many watches you buy at the duty-free store are not that meaningful anymore as a precious handmade piece that tells a history.
Absolutely. You know, the way to appreciate watches that you kind of imparted upon all of us, and you've certainly taught me as well, Aurel, I even apply to other things. So when I decided, you know, I like motorcycles, so I'm going to start putting together a small collection of vintage motorcycles a few years ago. I remember I found a Norton Commando, which is from 1972, which is a bike I always wanted. But it was amazing because it was the guy who had bought it in 1972 still had it. So he still had the original bill of sales, the original MOT. It was still the original paint. And I remember, and I was like, okay, if this was a watch, Aurel would say this is a good watch. So I remember emailing him, and that's exactly just as your friend did. I didn't, for 1 second, even argue with him about his price. I said, at your price, I'm happy to take it. Then I was thinking about it, and I was like, you know what? If this guy was in his 20s in 1972, he's probably a little bit older nowadays. He probably doesn't check his email as frequently as, say, you and I do. I'm just going to telephone him. And so he picked up the phone, and he said, oh, yes, I'm very happy to sell this motorcycle to you for 2 reasons. And I said, oh, what's that? You know, because we had quite a pleasant conversation. And he said, well, the first one was you didn't argue about the price with me because I think it's a fair price. And I said, I agree. That's exactly why. And he said, the other thing is you actually bothered to call me because everyone just kept sending me messages. And at some point he became inundated by it. And so I guess the point is that every person, depending on the culture that has shaped them, has a means of communication that they are used to, right? So now, in the last, let's say, month or month and a half or so, the way in which we communicate has been radically altered, right? The way in which we are having social discourse, where we're doing interviews, we're conducting business. I even have cigar smoking sessions with my friends and cocktail sessions with my friends. It's through Zoom and through teleconferencing. Tell me, what do you think will be the long-term impact on the auction scene, if at all, if you believe, and do you feel that that digitization will become an instrumental part of it?
As you know, we had to not cancel, but delay our mid-May auction. Obviously, if the Swiss authorities prohibit more than 5 people to gather in one room, forget about it. There may be one day a situation when the Swiss government says, it's okay, you can gather hundreds of people again in the same room. That alone is not going to be enough for us to say, hooray, hooray, let's have an auction. Because the same government may say, anyone traveling from abroad first has to do 2 weeks of quarantine. And I really don't think that any Italian collector or Hong Kong collector or Los Angeles collector will come to Geneva and sit first for 2 weeks at La Reserve, sit out the quarantine, and then come to the preview. And possibly when traveling back, do the same again because his own government asks for the same when you come from Switzerland. So we are facing, of course, huge challenges these days. To do a successful auction is not necessarily to manage to bring 2, 3, 4, 500 people under one tent at La Reserve. In fact, already today, here at Phillips, I don't know what to do. Sometimes somebody calls me and the whole computer blows up. To do a successful auction isn't just about bringing 500 people into one tent. It's already today a fact that here at Phillips, we have more than double the number of bidders participating who are not in Geneva in the tent, whether they're online or on the telephone. They have left maybe advance bids, absentee bids. There's so many platforms today. So I would be absolutely okay to imagine one day an auction where there's nobody in the room. Because if you and I can have a meaningful conversation over Zoom, I think you can also bid in a competitive, meaningful, well-informed way over Zoom. The problem is a different one. How self-confident are you that you get the watch that you imagine buying when you've never seen the watch.
Mm.
Now, some say, well, there are pictures in the catalog, and the picture quality today is 10 times better than what it used to be 10 years ago or 20 years ago. They, of course, have a condition report. They can call us and say, hey, Aurel, is that a watch that you see fit in my collection? And I can say, you know what? No, because I know you don't like the dial with that amount of patina. You're more into, you know, very crisp, black and white, everything's clean. So in my view, more important aspect is, how do I get all the thousands of bidders to a degree of knowledge and understanding that they are in total confidence able to raise their paddle if the watch is $100,000, up to $100,000, without ever wondering, am I sure getting a $100,000 watch, or is it going to turn out a $90,000 watch because I haven't seen it myself? We speak a lot with collectors, and many say, well, I know that you stand behind your watches. I know that you don't mislead me, because you understand that me coming back for another 5 or 10 years has more value than me overpaying by $10,000 a watch now. So digital and any, you know, not tete-a-tete, like any online communication will become more and more important. We're far from having cyber previews and cyber auctions. Can I imagine one day everybody having these amazing goggles, maybe even those gloves that give you the, imagine you can preview a watch. No, the preview, you can wind a watch that you don't hold in your hands. Because the problem is, a vintage watch isn't just a picture. A vintage watch is something tactile.
Yes.
The sharpness of a lug. The way I wind the watch and it makes clack, 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 clack. Or the sharpness of the teeth on your winder that gives you an indication of how much wear and rubbing it had. Have you ever opened the case back and enjoyed the smell of old oil? A vintage watch that you open and you get that cloud of oil from the 1940s that gives you the confidence that you're the first person to open it, is making me bid another bit higher, because I know that is a sleeping beauty. So how are we going to replace all these very sensual experiences? I think we're far from that. But it will eventually come. Probably not in my lifetime, that you can smell and cyber view a watch from your living room. But clearly, every auction house has upped their communication channels. There's much more education happening. Some are launching now webinars and discuss dials. We will go at an accelerated pace in the coming weeks, months, and years because of Corona.
Well, I see this already on your YouTube channel, you know, and I congratulate you on you launching this. And for those of you guys watching this, please go to the Phillips watch YouTube channel and subscribe there, because it's a great educational platform. And I think that you're absolutely right. I think there will come a point where people will probably not have a possibility to examine watches one-to-one in the, you know, with the kind of proximity and the frequency that they would like to have. But the first thing I would say is that, you know, you're giving a great education for how to assess the quality of a vintage watch, right? And then the other thing that you have a great advantage with is that you have great people that you've trained, who are your colleagues. And to have a dialogue with them, which can be through Zoom, is maybe just as, to me, is invaluable, you know? And it's also based on the fact that for you, what you do, there's a huge amount of trust there. You know, when I bought this watch in your auction in Hong Kong, which was a Speedmaster 105.12, I remember I looked at it, and I didn't have a huge amount of time, so I just looked at it. Then I looked up at Paul Boutros, and Paul Boutros looked at me and went, like, "It's killer." I was like, "Okay, fine. That's all I need to know." I went out, and then I bid on it, and was fortunate enough to win it, because Paul, I know Paul. And I know Thomas and I know yourself. And if you say that it's a phenomenal watch, which is, you know, it's killer, it's code name for, trust me, it's immaculate, right? And it was. And so I think that because of the faith and the trust that you've created with your clients, but also because you really genuinely appreciate this culture, and you are the last person to be opportunistic about it, quite the opposite. You want to build it for the long term, you know, that I think that there's a real possibility there. But it has to have that trust, you know?
You said something very intelligent, and at the same time didn't realize that there's another trap just lying ahead of you and me. You said, oh, I spoke to Paul Boutros, and Paul Boutros said, it's a great watch, trust me. And Paul is one of the finest, most trustworthy guys on the planet. The same applies to James Marks, Thomas Perazzi, to Alex Godby. I'm thrilled what a great team we have. But how can they say it if they haven't seen it?
That's a
so
good point.
Think of the following. We might do an auction at the end of June in Geneva, and I say might. You know, the curves are doing that, the corona infections and the healed guys and the guys in intensive care. It's very difficult to predict. The minute you say, hey guys, it's looking good, they go outside and do barbecue parties. So
it's crazy.
I'm scared that optimism will become actually the opposite of a self-fulfilling proficiency.
Or I will just stop you that for saying we lived through that here in Singapore. We were very proud of ourselves and maybe a little bit arrogant because we thought we had it under control, right? And so then people kept going out, going to nightclubs, going to parties and so on. And then we had a huge spike in new cases. So you're absolutely right. We have to be very diligent and conservative about this. I'm sorry, please continue.
Not at all, but think of the following problem. Maybe America will not let people travel intercontinentally by the end of June. And our good friend Paul Boutros cannot come to Geneva. If you call Paul Boutros and say, hey, Paul, how is lot 12? He says, wait, I haven't seen it. So of course, you can call Aurel, you can call Tiffany, you can call Alex, you can call Marcello, you can call Virginie. We have a great team in place. But there are challenges at every corner that we've never experienced before, and we have to think and look for solutions.
Aurel, if a physical auction is not possible, would you consider to go fully digital on the next couple of auctions?
Very interesting question. There are plenty of watches that we can sell very easily digital. A double-sealed modern Patek Philippe annual calendar, and I know that Patek Philippe themselves went online just a couple of weeks ago. Yes. No problem, because you don't even need to see it, you don't need to touch it, because it's sealed. You can't even wind it and touch it because it's still sealed. I'd like to think that a portion of the market will achieve 100 cents a dollar on that level. What are we doing with all the other watches? And I may not go all the way extreme to a Henry Graves super complication or a Paul Newman, but let's put our hand on our heart. I don't think that the big auction houses will sell their Picassos and Basquiats online. And I don't think that the watch industry can sell a Henry Graves pocket watch with 24 complications online. The auction room, the events surrounding are hugely important. Because how many collectors, die-hard collectors, besides the holidays with the family, the birthday of their wives, the wedding anniversary, the most important moment of the year is a trip to Geneva or to Hong Kong or to New York, because this is where they meet 400 friends. They hang out, drinks, pre-dinner drinks, dinners, post-dinner drinks with their buddies, talk watches, argue about a loom plot here and there. This is all gonna fall off the cart. I mean, does it mean that Wimbledon will be digital? No, you cannot. I mean, I want to see Federer on a computer with a mouse and no. And there are so many aspects of watch collecting that for these aspects, I don't see a replacement in the digital space yet. So online auctions, why not? But what are we doing with everything else that cannot go online?
Understood, sir. Okay, I want to, actually, before I shift gears into some of the projects that you've done, which I feel are very groundbreaking, let me ask you also something. In your capacity as the head of the jury of the Geneva Grand Prix, do you think a Grand Prix can still be held? Because if anything, that's sort of a very densely packed room. Or is that something that you would prefer to do perhaps digitally?
Well, technically speaking, you can vote online. And in fact, the jury in the past few years, the first round, selecting the finalists, has done that remotely, literally without seeing another member of the jury, without necessarily seeing the watches, based on the documents, the explanations, the descriptions, the pictures that were available online that the manufacturers who participated sent in as a data sheet. The second round of voting, the finalists, are voted for in a room where the specialists, the jury members, can touch the watches. And how many leading specialists and jury members in the past said, I never thought what a great finish that watch has until I had it in my hands. Or I never noticed what the finish is underneath the balance until Philippe before pointed it out at me at the jury gathering. So there we are back to the same system with the auction. The human interaction, one-to-one with the watch in hand, is hugely important. Can we announce the results online? Yes, of course. Yes, of course. It would be sad to see the gala not to take place because we cannot bring the thousands and thousands together at the Grand Théâtre. But yes, we can just post the results online. Why not? But I think the biggest challenge for a GPHG is what if you cannot bring 30 jury members together in one room, examining watches together and show each other. I mean, you know, in the past, Claude Fair, one of the world's leading gemologists, said, hey, did you see on that lady's watch that claims to have only the flawless diamonds on it? Take the UV light and suddenly you see they're all fluorescent and it seems to be more industrial than well made. Philippe Dufour comes up with comments. Then you've got watchmakers, independent watchmakers, historians. These discussions were absolutely priceless.
I love that. Now, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about something that's one of my favorite things that you're doing, which is the kind of Phillips Aurel Bacs limited edition watches. And I guess your first project happened last year, which was a series of Zenith watches. And I think that, so I know you did one pièce unique, which was an extraordinary watch, and then you did two A386s, one in the gold case, and I think, and then you did one in the steel case with a kind of tropical totalizer, and I think chapter ring to it, which I have to say may very well be the most beautiful Zenith in modern horology. So I think it's quite impressive that for your first special edition, you made already one of the best looking watches of all time. And I love the fact that you sold that watch out in the few hours it took to have the dinner that surrounded it. Tell me a little about this and what your ambition is for the future and why you enjoy these projects.
Ambition, to be very honest, zero. There is no business plan underlying this project. It was a coup de foudre. It all started by Julien Tornard asking, hey, we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Zenith. Would Phillips be interested in auctioning a pièce unique? And we said, wow, what an honor. Great, yes, send it when it's ready. And there was a bit of silence and a bit of, what's the matter? Well, the watch doesn't exist yet. Like, what do you mean? It's like June and the November auction is around the corner. And the reply was, well, we thought that you might want to come with Alex to Locle and design it. Wow, quel honneur. So obviously I'm a storyteller, so always take off 5% of the color and the dialogues, but that was about how we slipped into this project. I mean, I think we were less aware of that project coming our way than Mother Mary expecting a baby that turned out to be Jesus. Anyway, let's be serious. We drove on a super hot July day to Locle, Alex and I. I think by the time that we arrived at the Zenith manufacture, I think the shirt was sticking on my body. It was north of 30. And especially I, for the first time, saw how incredibly agile and fun modern software is that the watch manufacturers use when designing a watch. You start with a black and white silhouette that is a Zenith A386, and you have some sort of silhouette, and you say, can you make that blue? Boom. I mean, click, click, mouse, mouse, it's blue. Oh, that's awful. Can you make it green and blue? Oh, it's even worse. Can you make it white and red? Oh, that looks like the Red Cross. And it was a bit of a trial and error. And gradually we say, yeah, that looks good, that looks good, that looks good. And it's a little bit like a chef that takes the spoon, dips, tries the sauce, missing some salt, and then a bit of salt. So that's the process. It wasn't scientific, it wasn't at all professional. It was literally passion, pleasure, guts. Romain, Julien, Marine, Alex, myself, having fun. The funny thing was, when we settled for a one-off platinum with lapis on the dial, we suddenly realized that there were another 30 designs that we've done the same day that we were sorry to just scrap and throw in the bin. And that's when we decided, well, maybe we want to save a steel version and a gold version and just make a limited run for a few friends. First 10 pieces, then 20 pieces, then 49 pieces, 50 pieces. We were shy to go north of 50. And everybody encouraged us at Zenith, friends in the office. Well, I know that I have 5 friends who would want that. We couldn't show it and do what Breguet did 200 years ago after the French Revolution. He did the souscription. I couldn't go shopping with the design and say, give me 50% up front and I'll do one for you. We wanted to have the surprise. We wanted to, you know, have a little scoop. So we settled for a humble 69 watches. I think we could have sold many more. And nor for Zenith, nor for Phillips, we would become rich out of the project in terms of rich on the bank account. It was fun. It was creative. Some do cooking, some do music, some do yoga. Well, Aurel and I, Alex and I went to Le Locle to design the watches to sort of, you know, let go the steam and the passion that is inside our soul and mind.
That's nice.
Well, maybe I was encouraged because a few years ago, winning a bet with Laurent Ferrier, I was granted to design a watch for myself. This is all how it started. We had a little bet about the outcome of the 2015 Laurent Ferrier Pièce Unique for Only Watch. And I won the bet. And the price was that if I win the bet, I can design one for myself. I mean, not copy that, but do a watch, a Laurent Ferrier for myself, which is, by the way, my confinement watch today.
That's fantastic.
And it was the same, trial and error. I'm sure that if you have 5 3-star Michelin rated chefs and you say, is that sauce perfect? One will say, no, I think it needs a bit more pepper. And the other one says a little bit more cream or butter. So that was a project for me. I wasn't interested what the rest of the world would think of the watch or say about it. But once that I had the drawings lying on my desk, I had a colleague, Alex, saying, what's that watch on the desk? And I said, well, I'm doing a little one-off for me. Can I have one too? The next day, Helmut Krott, I'd like one too. The next day, Paul Boutros, can I have one too? And it became a little series of 12 pieces for, and I know that many people say it's a Phillips series. Some people say it's an advisory board series. It was just made for those who happened to be there on that day in the office seeing the drawings. And they were obviously either advisory board or colleagues. And it was done out of pure passion and joy to design a watch.
Amazing. So I guess the question that I guess the viewers would have then would be, can we conceivably expect something this year in terms of Phillips Aurel collaboration? And if so, would you be able to hint to us in some ways what that watch might look like?
You're asking me to reveal now
on
camera what we're going to reveal? Okay, let me tell you. Okay, We'll start in September with a all titanium Nautilus with a Ferrari red dial. But don't tell anybody, Wade. Don't tell anybody, okay?
That's fine.
We'll follow through with a rock crystal Royal Oak skeletonized minute repeater.
Yes, that's phenomenal.
But seriously, we have ideas. We're talking to some manufacturers, but it's too early to say what it is, when it is. And it's not because I'm greedy to share information with you. Any project of that kind, obviously because of Corona, was also put on freeze. We are not able to go and see the manufacturers. We're not able to ask the prototypiste to produce a first case. So at the moment, things are delayed. I wouldn't say indefinitely. I try to move forward, but it's very challenging these days. And again, it's not something that is a business, it's a hobby.
Sure.
And if it comes, it comes. If it's delayed, it's delayed. It's not part of the P&L. It's not part of what we have to do day in, day out.
Excellent, sir. So I've dug up a couple of watches that I have lying around the house. And of course, they're nothing in comparison to the stuff that you normally look at. But I just want your thoughts on them in terms of like, is there anything you see there that, okay, this particular watch, maybe you might want to consider getting rid of. It's a good time to sell it. This you might want to hang on to. This was a really foolish thing to buy to begin with. Feel free to be completely open. So I think Sumit is at Revolution headquarters, and he'll screen share them with us. And if you don't mind, I'd just love your opinion on that. So Sumit, you can get started with anything. Maybe we'll start with the Roger Dubuis.
The Roger Dubuis.
Yeah, it's a homage chronograph. Well, I mean, listen, my favorite watch of all time is the 1463, the Tassi Tondi, you know?
Yes.
But I don't think I will ever be able to afford a Tassi Tondi, at least not for a while. And I kind of almost feel that this is kind of, I mean, clearly it's not the same thing, but there's a bit of that spirit in this watch. This is obviously a Prix Richemont Roger Dubuis. It's an homage chronograph, which has the Bulletin d'Observatoire seal with it. But I love the use of the Breguet numerals. I love the pushers, which are clearly sort of inspired by the Tassi Tondi pushers. But what do you think? Do you like this watch, Aurel?
I absolutely love them. They, of course, have seen in my view, very appropriate rise in value in recent seasons. I remember not finding buyers in the 90s or noughties for them below 10,000 francs. They have done really well recently on several platforms. There haven't been really many auction results because probably these watches sell quicker than they can even make it into an auction catalog. Your pessimistic outlook that you can never afford a Tassi Tondi is probably wrong, because if you wait another season or two, probably a Roger Dubuis will be worth as much as a Tassi Tondi, and then you just swap them. I think they're probably finding a natural ceiling at one point. I don't see them going into the 6 digits. They're now in the solid mid 5 digits, dollars, francs, euros. I've never sold a watch myself, and this is maybe an advice I just give you now. I've never sold a watch myself that I loved, because I was able to collect a nice profit. Meaning, as much as I never not parted with a watch that I really didn't want to see anymore, and that in the meantime lost 50% of its value. If it's not bound to stay with you, get rid of it. If you want to keep it, even if it doubles and triples your investment, don't sell it.
Totally.
So if you continue enjoying and wearing that watch, it's good to know that you have double or tripled your money, but don't get weak knees just because somebody's waving in front of you with a $40,000, $50,000 check. Maybe one day when you can swap it with a Tassi Tondi, well, then maybe you want to do that. A word of advice, I think the Tasti Dondi is a reference that at the moment you buy overall very well. You can pick up very good examples in yellow gold, just a tad over 100,000 US dollars. That means they have not kept in sync with the overall sort of market index, whether it's Patek or even Patek chronographs. So they have been relatively underperforming. Not lost value, but they're lagging behind, and you should look at 1463, a good one in yellow gold for just over $100,000.
Oh wow! Thank you so much for that advice, Aurel. I certainly will.
Of course, if you really want to find one and not wait for an auction, you can always call James Marks at Phillips Perpetual, our private treaty branch, and he will source one for you. A little bit of name dropping has now happened.
And he's a great guy also. And so just to let you guys know as well, there's a private sales channel for Phillips as well. James Marks, who heads up Phillips in London, or Phillips Watches in London, is a very cool guy, clearly a friend, well, a colleague of Aurel's and a friend of mine. And yeah, he's a great source for that. And if anyone needs information about that, just message us and we'll put you guys in touch. Okay. I guess I'm going to show you two Rolex Daytonas. I guess the one is the watch that we were talking about before, which is a 6241 Paul Newman. I was lucky enough to own one when it didn't cost crazy money. And you know, sometimes I feel a little bit concerned wearing this watch nowadays because it's become so much of a symbol of a certain type of lifestyle, if you understand what I'm saying. Sorry, but I just took it off my desk.
To me, this is the most, well, from the non-screw pusher Daytona family, this is probably the best looking color combination. White dial, black bezel. My all-time favorite is the Panda 6263, white dial again. For some reason, I prefer the white dials. Myself, I would either dress it in a Jubilee bracelet or occasionally wear it with a really beautiful sort of vintage Hermes style bracelet. I'm not the kind of the Bund guy. I think you or a Paul Newman get away much better with the Bund than I do. Same discussion. If you like it, keep it. If you are concerned what your friends think of you when wearing that, well, one way to look at it is, yes, you're wearing the wrong watch. The other way to look at it, well, you have the wrong friends.
I love that. That's great.
I know, and I don't know how Singapore is about that, but I think Singapore is pretty liberal about the social acceptance of, you know, enjoying high value objects. I think, for example, here in Central Europe, or especially in Switzerland, whether it's in Zurich or Geneva, the culture Calviniste. I see the wealthiest people in Geneva drive around with a Volkswagen Polo. They would eventually not wear a Paul Newman because there's a stigma of like, oh my God, he just made $250,000. How did he make them? Did he really pay $250,000? Nobody's even asking if you paid $5K for it 25 years ago, or if it's your family's heirloom. For me, a watch to have whenever I had a Paul Newman, and I think the first Paul Newman I've had when I was 17, that I upgraded to a gold Paul Newman. Wow. Yeah, they were in the low thousands back then. Whenever I sold it, I regretted it, and the next one I had to pay 50% more.
Right.
Sold it again because I needed to fix my car. I wanted to go on holidays. And regretted it again and paid again 50% more. So yes. To me, keep it as long as you enjoy it. And I don't think they have reached, well, I'm not saying they're going to grow in the same rate as they did in the last 5 or 10 years, but as long as the world stays the way it is now, which means we're all smart casual, we all want to be a little bit of a Paul Newman, we all want to be cool, young, dynamic. This watch is one of the most beautiful watches of the 20th century, and I don't think it will go out of fashion that soon. And as you've said it, even in Corona times online, you can sell them for, you know, a couple of $100,000 online unseen.
Excellent. And so,
So we have two keepers for now. Two keepers for now.
So I guess
I wonder if we have 10 keepers at the end with me.
6 or 7 years ago, I started just like thinking, hey, those Zenith Daytonas are kind of cool. And so I ended up buying an R series, which is from the first series of Zenith Daytonas with the 200 bezel, which Summit will pull up now. And I remember I paying something like $9 for it, and at the time it was like, I can't believe I paid $9 for this. And of course I was offered the porcelain dial ones.
Floating black dials, super.
What do you think?
I personally prefer the white dial. It's just a recent thing that I've kind of moved across the board to the more lighter colored dials. R series by far the best version. I like the fact that it's still got the old satin finish oyster bracelet. The floating, I mean, there's all these tiny details that by now, if you think the watch is from '88, I assume, this is Ferrari 288, Porsche 959, pre-McLaren F1 time, and they're today considered the greatest classics of the late 20th century. They're actually reaching old-timer status as we speak. So to me, this is an absolute symbol of late 80s decadence. Decadence as every cool guy with lots of hair on his chest had to have it. As a teenager, I was queuing in Zurich at Brunati, at Bucher, at Bayer to get one. There were, I think, 3,750 francs. And queuing as in begging, can I please have one? I never got one. But waiting outside eventually for people to come out with one and ask them, are you selling it to me? I needed to have this. I wanted to be cool. So I cannot tell you how many R series I must have had when I was at high school, but not financed by my parents, really sort of a bit of Swatch, Chronos and Scuba, a bit of sports Rolex and a bit of savings altogether. So you wear it, you enjoy it, keep it. It's a cool watch. It's you. And yeah, it went from 10 to 20 to 30 to 40 to 50 to plus. Who cares?
Thank you, Aurel. Okay, so now I'm going to show you the watch that I'm wearing on my wrist, but Summit's got a shot of it as well. And that's actually, I always find it funny because when the price of when the Royal Oak was first launched in steel in 1972, it was the same price as a Jaguar, and I remember people just, were just so, I guess, kind of shocked by it, but at the same time, it became part of the allure. But I've always liked them in yellow gold for some reason, just because I find them to be particularly, kind of sexy and a little bit louche and a little bit naughty in that way. So I managed to come up with this example of it, which I bought off my friend's wrist quite some time ago, about 10 years ago. And it is a yellow gold B series, because I believe the yellow gold started in the B series from 1978, but still very importantly has the AP signature at 6 o'clock. And I think it's a pretty good example because the bezel looks to be in pretty good nick to me.
It looks like a super premium example. Good for you. Out of 4 watches, all the 4 that you just showed me are personal favorites, have probably done really well in terms of value. But leave that aside, I think this is one of the best looking full gold watches. It doesn't look kind of vulgar, like, hey guys, I'm a used car dealer or butcher, kind of full gold show off guy. This sort of pigeon flannel elephant gray is absolutely brilliantly combining with that warm, often orangey tone, because there's a lot of satin finishing on the jumbo Royal Oak, and with the orangey patina, it's one of the best combinations ever. For me, definitely keeper. Someone in my family has the same watch. I just don't allow her to wear it because I'm scared that it will get scratched up. But it's especially, look at the champagne date window. What a fantastic detail, the champagne date window against the gray dial. So keeper for sure. You've done very well, and on the appropriate occasion, a watch you can very comfortably wear without getting, you know, sort of the jealous and lacking understanding looks from across the table.
Well, thank you,
Fabulous
Aurel.
watch.
And I love vintage gold watches as well, because I always feel the color of the gold somehow has this beautiful sort of subtlety to it, which is very different from a brand new gold watch. You know, I guess we should go from the AP to, I guess, the Patek Philippe equivalent, which is the Nautilus, of course. So Summit will pull up a picture of a 3700 1A, which was launched in '76, but this one's from 1978. And yeah, maybe let me know what you think about this one.
Well, I'm hoping and I'm waiting for a watch that I can really trash now on this channel here. Why do you keep on showing my all-time favorites? This is just not making it easy for me, because it sounds kind of repetitive. I say love it, love it, love it, and wear it, wear it, wear it. 3700 in steel is a particular watch in my life. First, because when my father turned 50, this was a gift my mom gave him. It was back then 3,360 francs. I think we still have the receipt from Bayer in Zurich when my father bought that watch. And it looks so good on his wrist. My dad is 86 now. It's brilliantly looking. I can't see from the picture, well, I can see the bezel is really strong. I can't see what generation the dial is. Is it possible that you're missing an accent on the E of Genève? So you see, this is where we're struggling.
It is.
Yeah,
I'm missing an accent. You're right.
So this is where online expertise comes to its limits. But leave aside these tiny micro discussions on accent here and Mark 2.5 dial and so forth. 3700 right. With the Royal Oak, probably as good of a design ever designed by any human being for any watch. Steel is very humble. Of course, by now, I think literally, I mean, you know, I'm wearing as a daily banger a 5711. Never has the charm of a 3700 or the class, but when I bought it, it was A, waterproof. I knew it was something I could replace eventually, much less so today, without going bankrupt. And I've been wearing it to the jungle, to the desert, on the most adventurous trips around the world, to Cambodia, to the Middle East, wherever I've been. And when last summer in Capri, I was wearing my 5711, the taxi driver, when I hand him the money, he looks around and says, "Nice 5711. Are you selling it? Are you selling it?" When you know a taxi driver in Capri wants to buy your 5711, you know it's no longer that discreet as you thought when you bought it in the 2000s.
Exactly.
So 3700, fabulous watch, even though they're now going very comfortably north of 100K. I would wear it. I would enjoy it. It's now 5 watches to keep in your collection. Your banker is not going to love me because you won't see any money coming in from watch sales. And my Phillips colleagues tell me probably, "Aurel, you're such an idiot. You could have just put a really nice online auction together for Corona with Way."
Yeah, that's what
I'm a hunter. I'm a hunter and gatherer, and keeping is I shouldn't say it too loud, but keeping is so much easier than parting with.
Indeed, sir. Now I'm going to show you a bit of an oddball watch. It's what they call a skinny engineer in gold by IWC. And I'll tell you, like, I had always wanted a watch with a Kandjar on it, you know, but unfortunately the Rolexes with this famous crest from Oman is beyond my ability to afford. And one day I saw this watch, which I found very interesting, and I actually traced, and I'll tell you, it actually was something that Nick Phillips was wearing, and eventually I ended up buying it from him. Well, he was sweet enough to sell it to me. And I ended up going to visit IWC. I got a extract from the archive, and but even better, I got to sit with Hannes Pantley, and he told me the whole story about how, you know, in the 80s they had these watches, and they're like, we got to sell them to someone. So he went to go see the Sultan of Oman, and he bought a bunch of them as state gifts, and then had the Khanjar affixed to it. But it's a weird watch, but I really like it though, you know.
So you just mentioned those sort of particular years at IWC. I strongly recommend you that you get Hannes Pantley to do a Zoom-in meeting with you. He can tell you stories of when IWC was close to go bankrupt, way before they were bought by Vodafone, Mannesmann, and he had to go to the Middle East with a suitcase full of watches that they had zero cash flow in the bank, and he had to fly with the suitcase to literally raise cash at the 11th hour, because by the 31st of the month, the bank would just shut down the company. And he came back and opened the suitcase, and where the watches were before, there was cash. And the same day, for hundreds of thousands, they went to deposit the cash and save the company. And it was the Middle East that saved IWC back then. Great watch. I've had it in steel in my younger years because it was the cool thing to have. I think it's very you. I would myself, and this is a little personal problem I have, a Conjure at 9 o'clock on a Datejust or an Engineer, the lack of symmetry would bother me. But I'm a particularly sick mind for that, for symmetry. It's also the period when they changed the logo from sort of vintage to wannabe modern. It's an interesting transitional period with that IWC and still use the old italics International Watch Company Schaffhausen. IWC is a collector's watch across the board, whether it's Mark 9, Mark 10, Mark 11, Engineer 666, Engineer 866, Aquatimer, 1832, the whole array of early sports watches. IWC is probably should be credited as one of the key inventors of the SUW, the sports utility watch, something that later Genta perfected, and today basically everything is a sports utility watch. IWC was one of the pioneers. I can only tell you and all your readers, don't sell them now, buy them, including the early Porsche designs. They're so brutally undervalued. I was, as a kid from Zurich, I would go and hunt IWCs at the Zurich flea market. And I remember when the Engineers were a couple of hundred francs, and it was so much value for the money. They climbed to maybe in steel, the early 666 with the Peloton Movement 841. I'm mixing up my numbers now, I guess. $5,000–6,000. 25 years later, they're still at the same price.
Yes.
In the meantime, the 3417 Amagnetic rocketed to close to 100,000. The Blancpains, everything, the Milgausses, IWCs are the ones to really buy now. They're rare, they're good, they're wearable, they're good masculine sizes. So, whereas I personally would probably be kind of, every time I look at the watch, say, oh my God, a red Kandra not in the center like at 6 o'clock, it would kind of disturb me. I can only say the good years of these watches are yet to come.
Wow, okay, great. So now I want to show you a Panerai, and this is, I guess, from the A series of Panerais that were the first years of the Richemont ownership of Panerai. And it's a power reserve watch called the PAM 27A. It's the second one that was ever made because it was number 2 of 500 from the A series. And I love this watch. Well, I kind of I'm starting to experience a Panerai sort of renaissance, where I know we've gotten into a phase where we went through a phase where everyone wanted kind of very small watches. But a Panerai should be 44 mm to me. And I really dig this watch because at one point during the height of the Panerai craze, this was a $20,000–$25,000 watch. And about 2 years ago, I managed to buy it for $2,500, you know? And because I guess the bottom of that market kind of dropped, the vintage watches dropped out. I think it's coming back a little bit now, but these old tritium dial A-series Panerais are kind of fun to me. What do you think, Aurel?
I have a very divided heart when it comes to Panerai across the board. I think there are a few companies who have a cooler history. There are a few companies who have a cooler heritage when it comes to design. Not that I'm saying that my watch right here has been inspired by Panerai, but look at the 1269, the no-nonsense design. I love no-nonsense design. What I definitely cannot wear myself is anything going way into the 40+ millimeters. My wrist is too small. I assume it's your wrist.
Yeah.
To me, it looks too big on your wrist. But hey, everybody has to be comfortable with the size they wear. I love myself anything that is as close to the original. The originals being the 3646 and the 6152 family. So I don't need a power reserve. I don't need a loop, a magnifying glass date. Panerai to me is less is more. And even though I think it's wrong to make for Aurel Bacs a 38 millimeter Panerai shrink version, I often speculated how comfortable and cool and simple would that be to have the great history, the great design of Panerai without the kind of volume on my wrist. So I would probably not wear it myself. That wouldn't be for me. But first of all, I'm very liberal. I believe that there's more than one God, and there's probably more than one way to happiness when it comes to wearing watches.
Very well put, sir.
But you can't go wrong in buying them, because really the market has beaten the shit out of Panerai in the last few years. And now it's a moment to buy them, especially the rare ones, the early ones, the limited editions.
I totally agree.
You won't find them in 3 to 5 years from now.
Totally, I also agree with that. I'm going to show you 3 Speedmasters, if you don't mind. So the first one is, I guess, the watch that they call the Ultraman. 145012-67, but delivered in 68. And I think they're cool watches. This was I like this watch in particular because it was delivered to Mexico City, and it was delivered to Holzer UC. And Holds, for whatever reason, they couldn't get the bracelets into Mexico City, so they had to manufacture these kind of Jubilee knockoff kind of bracelets. But I think it's kind of cool. What do you think, Aurel?
The Speedmaster is without a doubt one of the most iconic chronographs in the history of wristwatch chronographs. I often struggle to define for myself, if I had to live with one Speedmaster, what would it be? Would it be an absolutely first generation Broad Arrow? Would it be an Ultraman? Would it be something, an Alaska project prototype, something that has flown to space? I can't tell you. That orange hand makes a huge difference in terms of looks. It makes the watch come so alive. Something that I personally regret often, that many Speedmasters are by definition very much black and white, and not as colorful and rich of depth as many other peers. Speedmasters come really alive, like with an Ultraman here, when on top of that, the tritium markers have that beautiful camel beige tone. So great watch. Yes, you're paying a hefty premium for an orange hand and the knowledge that it is a correct Ultraman. But your piece seems to be a very strong example. I'm looking at the Lyra Lux, very strong definition. It seems to be razor sharp. I think any chronograph with a Jubilee style bracelet looks better than with a, more kind of quiet bracelet. So I would wear that. I would enjoy it, and I would keep it.
Fantastic. Okay, so I'm going to show you one last watch. I'm going to show you a Richard Mille.
Ha!
And this is my watch. It's an RM21. It's, I guess I would say not first generation, but not latest generation. But what I like about it is it's using this kind of honeycomb base plate made of titanium, and it has kind of an unusual bridge for its tourbillon, and it's in titanium.
Very good question. What would I do? Well, first of all, I've obviously noticed the incredible success Richard Mille enjoys on the planet. And one day, and this is now me, I was thinking, why is it that every multi-million-dollar tennis star, Formula One driver, Middle Eastern prince, and famous journalist, horological and sartorial journalist in Singapore wears one? What do they all have in common? And I said, either they're cooler than me, they're better looking than me, they're wealthier than me, they're more successful than me. They know something I don't know. And what's funny is they all have a Richard Mille. So I went out to buy myself a Richard Mille because I wanted to find out, is it gonna make me a better human being? Now, watch collecting is a journey that is full of trial and error, and you figure out with time what is right for you and what isn't. So that watch to me was wrong, and I sold it.
Sure.
To me, the absolutely very best Richard Milles are the very early ones. Some of them are now worth more than a semi-detached house in the London suburbs. It's unbelievable how the early ones are now considered holy grails, especially the ones that were made in 10 or just over 10 examples.
Yes.
I like the earlier ones. For me, a Richard Mille, for example, this is me personally, a Richard Mille to me has to be super light and super high tech when it comes to the material. So my dream Richard Mille would not be in white gold, not be in anything heavy. It just sort of goes against.
Exact conversation with iconic stuff.
Ah.
And I agree with you completely, Aurel. For me, it has to be a light watch because that's what he designed it for. Although maybe I think Ike is interested to purchase one that's in a precious metal. But please continue.
To me, I think my perfect Richard Mille would have to be a tourbillon.
Yes.
It's such a signature. It's kind of like champagne has to have bubbles, otherwise it just doesn't qualify as that. And as I'm not blessed with the wrist of iconic stock, I have to be very careful to buy a early generation, to have a small one that they're so much more balanced. They're so much more beautiful on your wrist. Probably I would have a Velcro bracelet, sort of like, and yep. So Richard Mille has proven it's no longer a fashion sort of gag. Richard Mille today is there to stay as a brand. Like McLaren, that was, early on McLaren, sorry, that's the race car. Are they really into driving on the street? Richard Mille is there to stay. And I think I can only warmly recommend any collector spend a few months with a Richard Mille. It may work for you, it may work not at all. I know the price is steep, but you also get a steep price back if you sell it, when you sell it. But you have to try out once. It's not something you can not have. It has to be on the short list. Live a few months with a Richard Mille on your wrist. Amazing.
Aurel, thank you so much for being so generous with your time, your thoughts, with your passion. You're an amazing guy, and it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you, my friend.
What, are you telling me that we're already hanging up after only 1.5 hours? What am I going to do with the rest of my day now?
Now Aurel's being coy because I know he's one of the busiest guys in this industry. So I also know that your days.
It's been a huge pleasure. It just shows how time flew quickly. I had huge fun talking to you. It's always a pleasure seeing you. I know some of your YouTubers said, "Why don't you clean the mess behind you?"
Yes.
But it's cool. I hope nobody was distracted by the library. I had to go to a quiet corner of the house because our daughter is probably only about to wake up at 11:30 in the morning, and I didn't want her to walk behind me on the way to the shower. So,
amazing. Thank you, Aurel.
Stay healthy.
And best of the wonderful as well.
Speak very soon. All the best to you. Bye.